What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved actors finds himself in a heated confrontation with a late-night talk show host that spirals completely out of control? Tonight, we're diving into the shocking incident that left audiences stunned and questioning everything they thought they knew about celebrity interviews. This is a story about power, manipulation, and what happens when someone finally says enough is enough. If you're ready to hear what really went down behind the scenes of one of television's most controversial moments, make sure to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe how this unfolds. The studio lights were blazing hot that evening as Tom Hiddleston made his way onto the familiar set. He'd been on the show several times before, always the consummate professional, charming and articulate. The audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause as he waved and took his seat across from the host. What none of them could have predicted was that this would be unlike any other appearance he'd ever made. Jimmy leaned back in his chair with that trademark grin, but there was something different in his eyes tonight, something calculating. The show had been struggling in the ratings lately, and network executives had been breathing down his neck. He needed something big, something that would get people talking. And he'd decided that Tom Hiddleston was going to be his ticket to viral fame. "So Tom," Jimmy began, his voice carrying that familiar late-night cadence, "I have to ask you about something that's been all over social media. There are rumors that you've been difficult to work with on your recent projects. Care to comment?" On that, the question hit like a sucker punch. Tom's smile faltered for just a moment before he composed himself. This wasn't the pre-approved list of questions they'd discussed with his publicist. "I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're referring to," Tom replied diplomatically. "I've had wonderful experiences working with all my recent collaborators." Jimmy's grin widened, sensing blood in the water. "Come on now, don't be modest. We've heard from multiple sources that you've been making some pretty unreasonable demands on set, wanting your own personal chef, refusing to work past certain hours, that sort of thing." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect. Tom's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained controlled. "I think there might be some confusion here. I've never made such demands, and I'd appreciate it if we could focus on the actual work I'm here to discuss." But Jimmy wasn't backing down. He'd done his homework, or at least he thought he had. His research team had dug up every gossip blog, rumor, and unverified tabloid story they could find. He was determined to push buttons and create a moment that would dominate entertainment news cycles for weeks. "Look, I get it," Jimmy continued, leaning forward conspiratorially. "Success can change people. You've gone from relatively unknown to a list pretty quickly. Maybe it's gone to your head a little bit. That's totally normal." The condescension in his tone was unmistakable. Tom's publicist, sitting in the wings, was frantically trying to get the attention of the show's producers, but they seemed content to let this train wreck continue. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every uncomfortable moment. Tom took a deep breath, his years of classical training helping him maintain his composure. "I appreciate your concern, but I can assure you that success hasn't changed my fundamental values or how I treat the people I work with. I believe in professionalism and respect, both giving and receiving it." The pointed emphasis on his last words wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Jimmy's smile became more forced, his eyes narrowing slightly. He'd expected Tom to laugh it off or play along with the bit, not push back with such quiet dignity. "Right, respect," Jimmy said, his tone shifting to something more aggressive. "Is that why you've been spotted at all these high-profile events? Lately, seemingly more interested in networking than actually focusing on your craft. Some people are saying you're becoming more politician than actor." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Tom's hands, which had been resting calmly on his knees, slowly clenched into fists. The audience was dead silent now, sensing that something had gone very wrong with what should have been a routine interview. "I attend events as part of my professional obligations," Tom said, his voice still controlled, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "I also attend them to support causes I believe in and to maintain relationships with colleagues I respect. I'm not sure how that translates to being a politician rather than an actor." Jimmy sensed he was losing control of the narrative. The research team had assured him they had solid dirt on Hiddleston, but everything was coming across as petty gossip rather than legitimate criticism. In his desperation to create a viral moment, he decided to go nuclear. "Well, speaking of relationships," Jimmy said, his voice taking on a mock-serious tone, "there have been some interesting rumors about your personal life lately. Want to address those?" Tom's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The careful politeness evaporated, replaced by something much more dangerous. "I think we need to be very careful about where this conversation goes," he said quietly, but his voice carried a warning that made even Jimmy pause. The host realized he might have overplayed his hand, but his ego wouldn't let him back down now. The audience could feel the tension crackling between the two men like electricity before a storm. Jimmy's producers were frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but he was too caught up in the moment to pay attention. He'd crossed a line and he knew it, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat now. The silence stretched between them, thick with tension, before Jimmy decided to double down on his approach. "Look, I'm just asking the questions that everyone wants to know the answers to," Jimmy said, trying to inject some casualness back into his voice. "Your fans deserve transparency, don't they?" Tom's eyes flashed with something that made the host instinctively lean back in his chair. "My fans deserve respect," Tom replied, his voice deadly calm. "They deserve to see artists who are passionate about their work, not manufactured drama designed to boost ratings." The accusation hit Jimmy like a physical blow. His cheeks flushed red as he realized that Tom had seen right through his strategy. "I think you're being a little paranoid here," Jimmy stammered, trying to regain his footing. "This is just normal. Interview stuff, normal." Tom's voice rose slightly, just enough to cut through the studio air like a blade. "Is it normal to ambush a guest with unsubstantiated rumors? Is it normal to ignore the agreed-upon topics and instead try to humiliate someone for entertainment?" The audience was completely silent now, watching this verbal chess match unfold, with the fascination of witnesses to a car crash. Jimmy's usual confident demeanor was cracking under the pressure of Tom's unwavering gaze. "I'm not trying to humiliate anyone," Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm just doing my job, your job," Tom repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. "And what exactly do you think your job is? Because I was under the impression that talk show hosts were supposed to engage with their guests in meaningful conversation, not attempt character assassination for the sake of viral content." Jimmy's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He'd never had a guest challenge him so directly, so articulately. Most celebrities either played along with his antics or deflected with humor. Tom was doing neither, and it was throwing him completely off his game. "You're being really dramatic about this," Jimmy said, trying to sound dismissive, but coming across as defensive instead. "It's just television. It's supposed to be fun." "Fun for whom?" Tom asked, leaning forward in his chair. "Fun for you. Fun for your audience. Because I can tell you right now that sitting here being subjected to baseless accusations and personal attacks is not my idea of fun." The host's research team had clearly failed him, and now he was exposed on live television, his tactics laid bare for everyone to see. Jimmy tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out hollow and forced. "Come on, you're a big boy. You can handle a few tough questions," Jimmy said. But even as the words left his mouth, he could see how poorly they were landing. Tom's expression shifted to something approaching pity. "Tough questions would involve asking about my process, my influences, my upcoming projects, the themes I'm exploring in my work. What you're doing is gossip mongering, dressed up as journalism." The distinction was clear and devastating. Jimmy had been exposed not just as unprofessional, but as intellectually lazy. His face was growing redder by the minute as he realized that his attempt to dominate the conversation had backfired spectacularly. "I think maybe you need to develop a thicker skin if you want to stay in this business," Jimmy shot back, his frustration finally boiling over into open hostility. The comment landed like a bomb in the studio. Tom's expression hardened, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full weight of his classical training and years of experience commanding stages and film sets. "Let me be very clear about something," Tom said, his words measured and precise. "I have been in this business for years. I have worked with some of the most demanding directors, most challenging material, and most complex characters imaginable. I have faced harsh critics, difficult audiences, and intense scrutiny. None of that has anything to do with what's happening here tonight. Jimmy tried to interrupt, but Tom continued, his voice growing stronger and more commanding with each word. What's happening here is that you've decided to use your platform, not to celebrate art or engage with ideas, but to tear someone down for your own benefit. That's not tough questioning. That's cowardice dressed up as bravery. The audience was transfixed. Many of them had never seen anything like this on late-night television. Jimmy's usual victims were either too polite to fight back or too invested in their own publicity to risk confrontation. Tom was proving to be an entirely different breed of guest. I think you're taking this way too seriously, Jimmy said weakly, his earlier bravado completely evaporated. Maybe we should take a commercial break. But Tom wasn't finished. No, I think we should continue this conversation. You wanted to have a real discussion, didn't you? You wanted to ask the hard questions. Then let's do that. Jimmy's panic was becoming visible to everyone in the studio. His producers were making increasingly frantic gestures, but the cameras kept rolling. The host had created this situation, and now he was trapped in it. What would you like to know about my work? Tom asked, his tone becoming almost professorial. Would you like to discuss the research I did for my latest role? The historical context? The emotional preparation required? The offer was simultaneously generous and cutting. Jimmy had no real questions prepared about Tom's actual work because he'd been too focused on manufactured controversy. The gap in his preparation was now glaringly obvious to everyone watching. Well, Jimmy stammered, completely off balance. I think our audience is more interested in the personal stuff. Tom's smile was razor sharp. Are they, or is that just what you assume they want because it's easier than doing the work required for substantive conversation? The question hung in the air like an accusation, which it essentially was. Jimmy had been called out not just for his tactics tonight, but for his entire approach to his job. The studio audience was completely captivated now, witnessing something unprecedented in late-night television history. Jimmy's usual swagger had been replaced by visible discomfort as he realized he was being systematically dismantled by someone who had clearly had enough of his games. The host's hands were fidgeting with his note cards, the carefully scripted questions now useless in the face of Tom's unexpected resistance. Of control, his voice carried a forced joviality that fooled no one. Why don't we start over? Tom's expression remained unchanged, his gaze steady and unwavering. Start over, he repeated, his tone suggesting he found the concept amusing. You mean pretend that the last 10 minutes didn't happen? Pretend that you didn't just spend considerable time attempting to damage my reputation based on tabloid gossip? The precision of Tom's words was surgical. Each syllable was delivered with the kind of controlled intensity that made it clear he was drawing on years of stage experience. Commanding the room with nothing but his presence and articulation, Jimmy's laugh was nervous, high-pitched. Come on, you're making this sound way more serious than it is. This is entertainment. This is what people tune in for. Is it? Tom asked, tilting his head slightly. Do people tune in to watch you attempt to humiliate your guests? Do they tune in to see you spread unverified rumors and call it journalism? Because if that's the case, then perhaps we need to have a larger conversation about what entertainment has become. The camera operators were getting shots they'd never expected to capture. Jimmy's usual confident posture had given way to something much more defensive. He was slouching in his chair, his shoulders hunched, looking like a student being dressed down by a particularly articulate professor. You're being really unfair here, Jimmy protested, but his voice lacked any real conviction. I'm just trying to do my show. Tom leaned back in his chair, and for a moment his expression softened almost imperceptibly. And I'm trying to understand what your show is supposed to be. Because when I agreed to appear tonight, I thought I was coming on a talk show. What I've encountered instead is something that feels more like an ambush. The word ambush landed with particular weight. Jimmy's mouth opened to protest. But Tom wasn't finished. You had researchers, didn't you? People who spent time digging through gossip websites and tabloid magazines looking for ammunition to use against me. Time that could have been spent learning about my actual work, my actual projects, my actual thoughts and ideas. Jimmy's face was flushed red now, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead under the hot studio lights. We always Do research on our guests? Research, Tom repeated, his voice taking on a musing quality. What an interesting word choice. Because research implies investigation, verification, a search for truth. What you've presented tonight feels more like a collection of rumors and speculation passed off as fact. This wasn't just a confrontation between a host and guest anymore. It had become something much more significant. Tom was articulating frustrations that many people felt about the current state of media, about the way celebrity culture had devolved into a feeding frenzy of manufactured controversy. Jimmy tried to regroup. I think maybe you're being a little sensitive here. This is just how the business works nowadays. The comment was a mistake, and Tom's eyes flashed with genuine anger for the first time. Sensitive. Quiet. Is it sensitive to expect basic professional courtesy? Is it sensitive to want to be treated with the same respect you'd show any other guest? I treat all my guests the same way, Jimmy said defensively, but even he seemed to realize how hollow that sounded. Do you? Tom asked, and his tone suggested. He already knew the answer. Do you ambush all your guests with personal attacks? Do you ignore agreed-upon topics with everyone? Or is this treatment reserved for people you think won't fight back? The implication was clear and devastating. Jimmy had picked on Tom because he'd assumed the polite, well-mannered actor would simply take whatever was dished out, miscalculation that was now being exposed in real time. I'm not ambushing anyone, Jimmy insisted, but his voice was getting higher, more strained. I'm just asking questions that people want answers to. Tom's smile was cold. People want answers. To a lot of things, they want to know why their healthcare costs keep rising, why their children's schools are underfunded, why their government seems more interested in partisan politics than solving problems. But instead of addressing any of that, you've chosen to focus on manufactured celebrity drama. The observation was like a knife to the heart of not just Jimmy's show, but the entire entertainment industry's approach to avoiding substantive content. Jimmy looked genuinely stunned, as if he'd never considered that his show could be anything more than lightweight celebrity gossip. That's not really our format, Jimmy said weakly. No, Tom agreed, it's not. And that's exactly the problem. The studio was dead silent, except for the hum of the cameras and the barely audible whisper of the air conditioning. Jimmy's producers were making increasingly desperate gestures from the wings, but the host seemed paralyzed, unable to figure out how to regain control of the situation, barely above a whisper. By all means, Tom said, spreading his hands in a gesture of invitation. What would you like to discuss? My upcoming projects, my process as an actor, my thoughts on the current state of theater. I'm here to have a conversation, but it needs to be an actual conversation, not a one-sided attack. Jimmy shuffled through, his note cards desperately looking for something, anything, that might salvage the interview. But his preparation had been so focused on controversy that he had virtually nothing substantive to work with. Tell us about your new project, Jimmy said, reading directly from his cards. Tom's eyebrow raised slightly. Which one? Several in development. The question revealed another layer of Jimmy's poor preparation. He didn't even know what Tom was currently working on, which made his earlier attacks seem even more random and unfounded. The one you're most excited about, Jimmy said, clearly improvising now. Tom studied the host for a long moment, as if deciding whether to throw him a lifeline or continue the demolition. Finally, he seemed to take pity on him. Working on a project that explores themes of identity and belonging, Tom said, his tone becoming more conversational, it's a character study that examines how people construct their sense of self in relation to their communities. Eagerly, grateful for the reprieve. That sounds really interesting. It is, Tom agreed. But I suspect that's not what you were hoping to discuss tonight. The comment was delivered with such casual brutality that Jimmy actually flinched. Tom had offered him an out, a chance to have a real conversation, but he'd also made it clear that he saw through Jimmy's desperation. I mean, I'm interested in all of your work, Jimmy said, but his voice lacked conviction. Are you? Tom asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice now, because that would be wonderful. I'd love to have a conversation with someone who's genuinely interested in the craft of acting, in the choices that go into creating a character. In the collaborative process of filmmaking, Jimmy's face lit up with hope. Maybe he could salvage This, after all, yes, absolutely. I'd love to hear about your process. Tom smiled, and for a moment it seemed like the interview might actually turn into something positive. Well, the first thing I always do when approaching a new role is extensive research. I read everything I can get my hands on about the character, the time period, the social context. I talk to experts. I visit locations if possible. I immerse myself completely in that world. Jimmy was nodding along, but Tom's tone was shifting subtly, becoming more pointed. It's really quite similar to what a good journalist does, actually. Tom continued. The thorough investigation, the careful verification of sources, the commitment to accuracy over sensationalism. The comparison hit Jimmy like a physical blow. Tom had just delivered a masterclass in how to do research properly, while simultaneously highlighting how poorly Jimmy had prepared for this interview. "I see what you're doing," Jimmy said, his voice tight with frustration. "What am I doing?" Tom asked innocently. "You're trying to make me look bad." Tom's expression became genuinely puzzled. "I'm not trying to make you look like anything. I'm simply answering your questions and sharing my thoughts. If that makes you uncomfortable, perhaps we should examine why." The psychological insight was devastating. Jimmy had walked into this interview planning to make Tom look bad, and now he was being confronted with his own tactics turned back on him. "This isn't how interviews are supposed to go," Jimmy said, his voice rising with frustration. "How are they supposed to go?" Tom asked. "Are they supposed to be one-sided attacks where the guest sits quietly and accepts whatever accusations are thrown at them? Are they supposed to be exercises in character assassination disguised as entertainment?" Jimmy's face was bright red now, sweat visible on his forehead. "That's not what I was doing." "Then what were you doing?" Tom asked, and his voice carried the weight of genuine curiosity. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looked very much like you were trying to create a viral moment at my expense." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Jimmy's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. He'd been caught, exposed, and he knew it. "I think we should probably wrap this up," Jimmy said finally, his voice barely audible. "Should we?" Tom asked. "Are you sure you don't have any more questions about my personal life? Any more rumors you'd like me to address? Any more unsubstantiated gossip you'd like to present as fact?" Each question was delivered with surgical precision, highlighting the absolute failure of Jimmy's approach. The host looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "I think we're done here," Jimmy said, reaching for his water glass with shaking hands. Tom stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "I think you're right," he said, beginning to remove his microphone. "But before I go, I want to say something to your audience." Jimmy's eyes widened in panic. "I don't think that's necessary." "I think it is," Tom said, turning to face the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, you deserve better than this. You deserve entertainment that doesn't rely on tearing people down. You deserve media that informs rather than sensationalizes. You deserve hosts who prepare properly and treat their guest with basic human dignity." The words were delivered with such quiet authority that the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. Jimmy looked like he might be sick, and most importantly, Tom continued, "You deserve to know that you have the power to demand better. You don't have to accept this kind of content. You can choose to support media that elevates rather than degrades, that informs rather than misleads." With that, Tom finished removing his microphone, placed it carefully on the table, and walked off, the set with the same dignity he'd maintained throughout the entire ordeal. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Jimmy was left alone at his desk, his face pale, his hands trembling slightly. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his humiliation. Finally, he looked up at the camera with hollow eyes. "We'll be right back after these messages," he said, his voice barely a whisper, but everyone in that studio knew that things would never be the same again. Tom Hiddleston had just delivered a masterclass in how to handle a hostile interview, and in doing so, he'd exposed everything that was wrong with the current state of celebrity journalism. That's the story of how one of Hollywood's most respected actors took on a talk show host and emerged victorious, not through aggression or anger, but through intelligence, dignity, and an unwavering commitment to truth. What did you think of Tom's handling of this situation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure to subscribe for more stories that reveal what really happens when the cameras are rolling.